Hi, I'm Mike Glenn, Senior Pastor, Brentwood Baptist Church, and welcome to our YouTube channel. We hope you like what we're doing here, and if you do, we'd love for you to hit subscribe or at least hit like. My friends tell me that that's really important, and that's the way they keep records of everything and keep track of everything, so do that for us if you would. For the last couple of maybe at least days, if not weeks, the Christian community has been rocked by the news of Jared Wilson's suicide. Jared was a very popular Christian speaker. He was a pastor on the West Coast, had written several books, but had always been upfront about his journey with depression and how it affected him and how he was dealing with it. And then he, from all we can tell, took his own life a few weeks ago. Now everybody is questioning, well, what should we have done? Should we have known? How could we have responded? And sometimes there's not a whole lot that you can do. So we thought we would take this moment and kind of talk about the issues of mental health and how you can be more aware of what the issues are and maybe be more sensitive to some of the people around you. Ken Core serves on our staff as our Minister of Congregational Care and leads our staff in all of these mental health issues. He's a great resource to us. So I've drug him over here to my office, and we're going to talk about this some. First, Ken, just give us a 50,000-foot view. When we talk about mental health issues, what are we talking about?
We're talking, it covers a multitude of sins.
Right.
And I want to use that word very carefully because I think that a lot of people think that mental health is a sin issue, and it's more than that. Right. I mean, sometimes our health is related to maybe some behaviors that are inappropriate, but a lot of times it's an illness, and we need to treat mental health as an illness and wellness as something that we can address. As an example, there are medications that are very appropriate for certain types of mental health issues. We tend also, I think, sometimes to minimize the struggle that people have.
If I was more spiritual, if I was more prayerful, I wouldn't need the medicine.
Exactly. And you have things like we just experienced with Jared. Apparently he had been dealing with some illness problems for years. Dysthymic disorder. Dysthymia is a depression that doesn't typically respond well to medication. To have a dysthymic disorder diagnosis, you have to be dealing with depression for over 2 years. And I think that we sort of minimize that if he just did or if we just did, and that's probably not going to be true. So I think it ranges everything from mild depression, which may be situational, to major disorders. It could be anything from anxiety to bipolar disorder, which is going to be very different in terms of the way it manifests. So I think we need to be very careful in how we describe mental health. It covers just a broad area.
Now, not all depression or not all sadness is a mental health issue. There are times where it's appropriate.
Yes.
I don't mean to belittle this, but a friend of mine said, hey, my family's having a hard time today because we just put down our dog of 17 years. And so everybody is sad and everybody's anxious and everybody's worried. There are situationally appropriate, but what we're talking about is chronic or acute anxiety or that affects the way we live.
So we have to be careful that anxiety and fear are not exactly the same thing. Fear is a very appropriate emotion. Some things we need to be fearful of, and so God gives us fear. That's different than anxiety, which may be a kind of fear about nothing in particular. It's just a generalized fear. Same thing is true with depression. It may be disappointment. I've had people who've come in for a type of therapy they think for depression. What they're really dealing with is a life disappointment, a major setback. That would be true with sadness. Grief also would be similar. Grief you have to live through. There is no shortcut kind of therapy. Now we can provide you some therapies for grief, but you still have to live through that. You're going to be sad for a while.
Okay. When we start talking about, the church has been real slow to this party. And we've spiritualized it. If you just pray about it more and that kind of stuff. Even though that we now know depression is brain chemistry related a lot of times, and if you take proper medication, then that can be regulated. You wouldn't say the same thing to a diabetic. You know, you would tell them take their insulin or whatever medication is appropriate. What can we as a church, what would you counsel a church, a pastor, to begin to do if we want to start looking at this issue?
I think we have to be more open and honest about mental health as an illness. I think the church has been very hesitant to talk about it. I think there's been kind of a dis-ease in exactly how psychology and spirituality have lived alongside each other for a long time. There has been a lot of debate about whether religion and medicine kind of fit together. We've resolved that with a lot of other issues, as you mentioned. Let's say we have diabetes or heart disease or kidney disease. We've never worried about that anymore in terms of what the role of spirituality is. We've had a harder time with mental health issues. So I think it's very important that the church begin to be honest, talk honestly, because the people sitting in your pews are struggling. And since we're talking about suicide also and the church's response to that, it's estimated that 50% of people in their lifetime will struggle with at least some type of suicidal thinking. At any one particular time, 6% of your adults, 17% of your teenagers are having suicidal thoughts. Now that's huge. That's when you look at your congregation on any Sunday morning, you just got to think, all right, 6% of these adults right now are struggling. So what we've got to think about is there's just a lot of despair. Where do people go if they can't talk honestly about that despair in church?
Right.
Where do they go if they're really dealing with depression? Can they admit to their own life group that they're taking some type of medication for depression or anxiety? Or are they made to feel like they're failures? And I think the church has to be able to talk about it honestly. I think we've done that well. You have talked from the pulpit openly about mental health issues. We've offered programs, support groups, therapy options. I think that's something that the church needs to do. We need to make friends with the mental health community. We have a lot of therapists in our community who are strong believers. They're also licensed therapists. They also have different areas of specialty. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to help our church members recognize that if they're struggling with any particular area, let's say it's trauma, we have trauma therapists who are believers who can help you.
Right.
You're struggling with, let's say, addiction. We have addiction specialists. You're struggling with sexual disorder. We have sex addiction therapists, all of whom are believers we can help you find. I think that's the first resource that the church can offer is simply a willingness to embrace this as a real issue and then help people find resources.
Okay, I'm afraid that I might have an issue. I keep having this recurring issue, anxiety, whatever. I'm afraid my teenager may have it or my spouse. What do I do next?
Good. Here's what we want you, at Brentwood Baptist, what we want you to do is to call the church. We've vetted over 30 therapists in our community, all of whom we trust that we have used. We will do the initial assessment here to try to figure out what is the best resource for you, what would be the best therapist for you. One of the things I've also realized is it's not just your training, it's also your personality that's going to make a difference. We will help you find the right resources, and then we will walk with you through that process. Now, I'm not going to go with you to your therapist, but if you have questions about the therapy options, if you have questions about the medication they're recommending, we can help you with that and help you find the right resources.
Okay. All right. So let's sum this up for this adventure in YouTube. One, mental health issues are real. Okay, they're not spiritual deficiencies. They're not a spiritual weakness. Just as some people are smarter than others and some people are more gifted than others, some people carry this burden, okay? If you are dealing with, if somebody in your family is dealing with it, then take the necessary medical steps to deal with it. Yes, surround it with prayer, surround it by people who will encourage you on your journey, but do take the necessary medical steps to take good care of you and stay in community. When we started closing Kairos several years ago, I just walked to the end of the stage at the end of our time together, and I would just simply say this. Listen, if you haven't heard it from anybody today, hear it from us. We love you, and it matters to us what happens to you. I didn't think anything about it. I just thought it was a nice way to end the service until all of the folks at Kairos, a bunch of them, found me later and said, you don't think anything about that, but I go all day long and nobody tells me they love me. So before we close, let me end with this. We at Brentwood Baptist Church love you, and it matters to us what happens to you. So take care of yourself. You're important to the kingdom, and you're important to God in His world, and we'll see you next time.